Good evening and welcome. I'm Clint Christopher, Superintendent, and I want to thank you for being here tonight, for taking time out of your evening to be a part of this important conversation. I know this isn't a position that any of us wanted to be in, whether you're here representing staff, parents, students, or the community. These are tough conversations, and the board has difficult decision ahead of itself. They don't take that decision lightly, and that again is why your feedback tonight is so important. In a moment, you're going to hear from our Director of Finance and Operations, Kahring. She's going to talk a little bit about how we got here, give you some background on school finance and our finances here in the district, and also share our proposed plans for the budget reductions. Over the last 10 years, the district's worked very hard to contain costs and keep those reductions from reaching our learners. Unfortunately, we're in the position now where the impact to students and to classrooms is unavoidable. We're constantly reviewing our budget, and this process has been underway for more than a year as we've tied in with our referendum and next steps. Since November, we've engaged our stakeholders at the building level more than we ever have before. We've asked teams at each building, that's administrators, teachers, and other staff, to look at budgets, at the proposed reductions, and help the budget committee and the district staff come up with the plan that was put in front of the board on Monday night. And now we turn to you, our community, for the next part of the stakeholder engagement process. After the presentation tonight, we're going to break out by issue, and I'll show you what those categories are here as we finish the presentation. But that's really important because we want a chance to hear as many voices as possible and get as much feedback on the issues that are most important to you. We're going to be collecting all of that feedback, sharing that with the board. The presentation tonight is being videotaped, so we can share that with the community as well. And then also after we share that information with the board, we'll be sharing out the themes, all of the emails, the voicemails on our website as well. I know there are many questions, and I'm sure we'll hear some of those tonight about when the district's going to go out for another referendum. And I don't have an answer to that. But I can tell you that the focus right now is on this work and on the budget. That's the most important work that we have right now. It's the immediate need to ensure that we have a budget in place for next year that reflects the district's current financial reality. After that's in place, the board will consider next steps. And I'll also just remind you too that the only time the district can go out for an operating referendum is in November. So I know as I've had the opportunity to talk with people in the community and with staff, why don't you go out right now? And that's because we can't. We can do bonding projects at different times in the year, but the only time we can go out and ask for operating dollars is in November. And again, there's a lot of work that goes into that decision, and the board's going to have to make that decision. But first, we need to set a budget and go through that process tonight. So again, I just want to say thank you for being here and being a part of the conversation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dee Dee.
Thank you, Clint. Thank you for being here as well. I know for some of you, if you were at the board meeting on Monday, this might be a repeat. I'll try to go through this and explain as the items that Clint mentioned earlier. So we'll get started here. So I want to first talk about our school district fund categories. Like other Minnesota school districts, Eastern Carver County Schools has a number of funds to account for the revenue and expenses as required by law. The largest fund is the general fund, and the most commonly and widely known funds within the school district. It will be the focus of our conversations tonight. The general fund is used to account for educational activities, instruction and student support programs, expenditures for superintendent, district administration, normal operations and maintenance, transportation, capital expenditures, and other legal school district expenditures not specifically designated to be accounted in any of the other funds. The other categories listed on the right are used to record the revenue and expenditures for activities related to those specific areas. School nutrition includes all activities as it relates to the preparation and service of meals, snacks, and milk for our children. Community Service Fund includes community education enrichment programs, programs that are not part of the K-12 education program and work together with them. This also includes recreational and fee-based programs. It also includes early childhood, special family education, school readiness, and adult basic education. The other categories are pretty self-explanatory. We do have 2 trust accounts that are a smaller amount, but again, all are important, but for different purposes. So a school district's fund balance is the accumulation and the variance between the revenue and the expense over time. District's fund balance is a very important aspect. A healthy fund balance provides for cash flow, a cushion against the unanticipated expenditures, enrollment changes, funding deficiencies, and at times proration of state aid. The fund balance calculation, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, is looking at what that fund balance amount is and dividing it by the expenses. We'll review that in just a second. Our school board's goal is to have at least a minimum of 5% unassigned fund balance, but prefers to be in that closer to 10% range. Within the fund balances, there are different categories. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the ones on the left, but just to give you a quick understanding, non-spendable is for things like prepaid items and inventories. The committed funds required school board action to put something aside for a specific purpose. A restricted fund balance represents the available resources dedicated by statute for a specific purpose, for instance, staff development or long-term facility maintenance. The fund balance that we will be talking about today is the unassigned fund balance, which is listed on as the gold numbers or wording on the right. It is the fund balance most often referred to when talking about school district's fund balance. So on this slide, it provides 3 very important financial aspects of the school district. First, the blue bars represent the unassigned fund balance for each of the years noted. Those are 2009-10 through 2018-19. The orange bar represents the amount of the school district's expenditure for the year. The line graph shows a relationship between the unassigned fund balance as a percent of the expenditures. The unreserved fund balance divided by total expense equals that unreserved fund balance percent that I mentioned earlier. So, as you can see, the fund balance dollar amount, the blue bar, has remained fairly constant since 2011-12. The expenses, on the other hand, have increased. That's due to growth in the district, as well as inflationary costs. With the growth in expenditures and a flat fund balance, you will note that the percentage of unassigned fund balance will decrease. The lowest fund balance on this chart is 4.87. That was back in 2009-10. The high was in 2011-12 at 11.32%, but it has declined to 8.48% in 2018-19. In an upcoming slide, I'll describe the estimated fund balance for future years. Next, let's look a little bit at the sources of revenue for the school district. 72% of the school district's revenue comes from the state. 21% of the revenue comes from local property taxes, and about 7% from federal and other sources. Some of those other sources include admissions, donations, fees for things like parking, interest income, and then rental income of our facilities. The general fund expenditures, combining salaries and benefits, about 76% of our expenses are related to personnel. Purchase services make up about 18 million of our expenses. It includes items such as utilities, repair and maintenance, payment to other Minnesota school districts, transportation, audit, and our contracted services. About 3% is spent on supplies and materials, with about 5% on capital and 1% on other miscellaneous expenditures. Now, looking at how the school district spends its money, about 81.4 cents of each dollar goes into the classroom in instruction and to support to student. 12.7 cents is spent on operating our schools. This includes utilities, custodians, capital improvements, and the like. 3.3 cents is spent on administration, and 2.6 cents on district support, which includes human resources, payroll, finance, technology, communications, and such. Now, what's notable on here is that this is per UFARS, which is the Minnesota's categories through its uniformed financial, accounting, and reporting standards. That's a long description, but it's the requirements that we have when we report to the state of Minnesota. And I'll share with you in a little bit why that's important for you to know. So next, let's look at how we develop our budget. So first, we need to have assumptions developed at the beginning of the calendar year to be able to develop a budget by the end of this June. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the budget assumptions for revenue, and on the right-hand side, the assumptions for the expense. If you're wondering, FY means fiscal year. That fiscal year is July 1 through June 30 of every year. In the current school year and next school year, we know that the legislation has provided a 2% increase on the state funding formula. In future years, we are assuming 1%. We use this 1% because the state of Minnesota does not provide a consistent funding increase, and it also is a more conservative approach to budgeting our revenue to make sure that we are not overestimating. Enrollment is based on ADMs, or average daily membership. This is similar to an FTE when you're looking at a personnel or employee. It's based on the time that the student is in the school district. It's different than the number of students or the bodies that we have in our schools. An example would be a student who starts mid-year. They're only here half-time or a 0.5 ADM. Today, as in the past several years, we have developed a 5-year budget based on increase of about 100 ADMs per year. This is true for the pre-planning of the 2019 referenda as well. On the expense side, the district will develop the expense budget using inflationary figures that are based on known factors such as contracts, estimates in the market, or based on past historical experience. So, putting all these numbers together and those assumptions, we are then able to develop a 5-year financial projection. On the left-hand side, you'll note the categories of revenue, expense, the variance between the revenue and expense, followed by the unassigned fund balance and the unassigned fund balance percent. So let's start with 2018-19 school year. You can see that the expense exceeded the revenue by 1.6 million, and the unassigned fund balance is 8.48%. In the current year, 2019-20, the expenses are projected to exceed revenue by $4 million. The school board purposely chose to use fund balance to avoid major cuts in the classrooms and in our buildings. This will bring fund balance down to $6.2 million and a 4.81 fund balance percent, which is the lowest it will have been since 2009-10. Moving to the next 5 years, you will see that starting next school year, 2021, the fund balance will decrease to 1.17%, and after that, it will go negative unless we reduce our expenses. This is just a picture of showing kind of what I just described, except bringing it back to 13-14. So as I mentioned previously, there are only two ways to change this, and that's to decrease cost or increase revenue. As we know, the district proposed a $5.6 million operating referenda that would have increased our revenue in the district. A portion of that revenue would have been dedicated for opening a new school, which was part of question 2. That amount was $620,000. That would have been used for the overall overhead costs for starting a new school. So about $5 million would have been available to bridge the gap between the revenue and the expense. The school board knew that the $550 per pupil unit would not cover all of the shortfall and that the district would still have to make budget reductions regardless. But the school board also knew that the community would not support an amount more than the $550 per pupil unit. So now if we take that same slide that we presented previously on the 5-year projection, including the same assumptions, but this time we've worked to make sure that we can maintain that 5% fund balance. You can see these amounts that we would need to cut in the yellow highlighted row. In 2019, you'll note that the district has about $872,000 in reductions for the current year. We will make those reductions, and those cost containment items will be implemented. As you can see in 2020-21, next school year, the district will need to cut at least $5 million. In the following year, $3.5 million, and then $1.7 to $2 million in future years. I again want to point out that in 18-19 school year and 2021-19-20 school year, the board chose to use fund balance for the purpose of avoiding additional cuts. You will see those figures in the variance row highlighted in blue. Additionally, if the district only cuts $5 million next year, the district will have to use another $2.2 million in fund balance. For this reason, you will see reductions greater than $5 million in fiscal year 2021. So now let's look at those budget reductions. So since 2008-9, the school district, as Mr. Christopher has said, has made budget cuts and contained cost. During these 10 years, the school board worked very hard to keep cuts away from from the classroom. So in this slide, you see two bars, the blue bar and an orange bar. The blue bar represent the percent of cuts made in each of the categories. Almost 23% of the $10 million in cuts were made in administration. For instruction, it was 26.4%, instructional pupil support, 19.4%, and so on. The orange checkered bar represents the amount of the overall budget for that category. For instance, instruction represents about 45% of the district's general fund budget. The difference between the blue bar at 26.4% and 44.9% in the orange for instruction demonstrates that the school board has implemented budget cuts during this 10-year period that stayed away from the classroom, instead made cuts elsewhere. In this particular chart, and if you recall, I talked about the UFARS, the Uniform Financial Reporting System. In this instance, how we view how we are set up and can take a deeper dive into different categories, the district views assistant principals, deans as administration because they perform administrative duties. They do evaluations, student discipline, parent communication. We view teaching and learning managers as administration as well because they direct district-wide curriculum, staff development, and learning targets. The state's UFAR system reports all of these individuals in instructional support. Because of the functions and their job duties, at Eastern Carver, we consider deans, assistant principals, and teaching and learning managers as administrators. As a result, in this chart, we include these positions in administration and report the corresponding budget, the corresponding expense, and any reductions in that category. The dollar bill that you saw previously also aligns with UFARS by including special education, athletics, and activities in the category of instruction and instructional support. The district splits out those programs as well to be able to look at those a little closer. The bar chart for reductions, again, provides us a means to look at the specific categories used by managing our district. So now on to the budget plan. You have a document with you that you should have got at the door that has the proposed containment. You'll see categories just as they were listed on that last slide. Some of the proposed reductions affect every category, and some are limited to just one or two. For example, the supply budget is in almost every category on that sheet, but will be listed as one item on this slide. So let's talk about the categories here. We have negotiate pay freeze. In fiscal year 2021, the district will work with our non-teaching groups to negotiate what's called a soft freeze. Steps, longevity, and lanes, if that's appropriate, will occur, but no new money to the salary schedules. This will be done district-wide, and it amounts to about $690,000. So one thing to note, the teachers are on alternating years in our contract negotiation, and you'll see that in a future slide. They will be in 21-22. The supply budget will be held at current levels with a 5% decrease of $286,000. At the high school, a 6-period day is proposed and would save $1.6 million. It will reduce teaching staff by 18, but we will need to add back 6 paraprofessionals to be able to provide support in supervision for a net of about 12 FTEs. In the middle school, there is a proposal to restructure the teaching schedule, which would impact the number of students the teacher would see during the school year. This would save just under $1 million with a reduction of 10 teachers. At the elementary school, it's proposed to increase class size by 1.5 students. This would reduce teaching staff by 10.65 and save $1.1 million. It's proposed to have one-time underspending of operating capital of nearly $480,000, which affects almost every category. With this plan, you'll see a restructuring of technology, saving $335,000 and 3 FTEs. An increase in high school fees includes an increase in parking fees, graduation fees, and gate admissions. The other includes a decrease in the communications department and a reallocation of resources to cover expenses in instruction and operations. Special education is proposing to reduce paraprofessionals by adjusting hours that they work, and that would save $133,000. The Buildings and Grounds Department will restructure custodial staff and save approximately $221,000. Looking at the next school year, the district is proposing again, as I mentioned earlier, to negotiate a soft freeze, this time with our teaching staff. That will provide about $1.9 million in savings. There's a small amount on budget. It's the same type of experience on the previous slide. And then the plan proposes to close East Union in 21-22. With this proposal, the students and teaching staff would be moved to other schools. Boundaries would need to be redrawn to accomplish this. The $548,000 in savings stems from the core operating costs: custodians, electrical, utilities, nurses, principal, etc. The next line is G&T, which is gifted and talented. It's proposed to reduce that by 1 FTE and also cut 1 foreign language program at the high school level. A cut of 2.14 FTEs and $80,000 in paraprofessionals is proposed in year 2. That has to do with special education paras at the elementary and media paras at the middle school. Restructuring in a TOSA position would save about $60,000. And as presented to the school board in July of 2019, bringing transportation in-house, meaning we would do the operations starting July of 2021, would result in a first-year savings of $200,000, and then the following year, another $400,000. Proposed in fiscal year 21-22 is also increasing facility fees, rental of our facilities, as well as athletic and activity fees by 10 to 15%. The other item includes reallocation of resources, a reduction of a school resource office at the middle school level, and reallocation of some of the Q-comp to the teacher schedule. So now if we take all of that from that previous slide that looks like this, include the reductions that we're talking about through fiscal year 22, the amount of the cuts now is at $20 million. Since 2009, we've increased the amount of reductions and cost containment, as I mentioned. You'll note that the budget reductions and cost containment are a little more evenly spread out by category, but still a little underweighted in instruction and special education, which we hope to continue. So now looking at some other future budget reductions, we have what's called Phase 1 and Phase 2, and I'll go through them a little bit. But if some of the items in the first year or the second year do not occur as planned or something changes, we will use this list to pull some of those items in. But some things will occur, especially in Phase 1. So for instance, the transfer from nutrition service of $550,000, that's an estimated amount, that will occur. By law, we can do that once every 3 years. The in-source of transportation, which I described on the previous slide, that's an additional $400,000. That will occur as well. Proposed, though, would be an increase in class size, additional increase. That would be another half a student, or 0.05 in the elementary and 1.0 in secondary. Teacher on special assignment, there would be some restructuring of instructional and PL coaches. The last one on that left-hand side is changing the bell time, and what that would be is increasing the days by 10 minutes a day, and by doing so, we can reduce 3 student days. The students will have the same amount of contact with their teacher, it'll just be in a little different manner. 2 of those days could be professional development for our staff, and 1 day would be no school and no staff. That would save about $370,000. Of that, about $130,000 relates to transportation. Phase 2, administration. This has to do with changing deans to lead teachers, decreasing an assistant principal at the high school. Part of the reason this is out further is this is also part of our teacher contract, where we have administrators performing evaluations, and we would need to continue on that until something changed. We would look at restructuring vocal and instrumental music at the elementary school, that's $300,000. Clerical, we would decrease clerical days, $162,000. Paraprofessionals, that's listed here, almost $450,000, would be eliminating paraprofessionals in kindergarten classrooms. And then increasing the walk zone. Currently, elementary is at 0.5 miles. We would increase that to 1. And at the secondary, from 1 mile to 2 miles. Other is a $50,000 savings in third-party billing through special education. And then the decrease in the supply budget would be eliminating the district paying for the ACT for students. With that, I'll turn it over to Clint to talk about the remaining items.
So just real quickly, looking at the budget process timeline, as I mentioned, getting that budget team together, developing those containment ideas with our building teams, reviewing those, prioritizing those. They've been to the board on Monday night. Tonight is that community session. Our next, we have a work session with the school board on February 10th. So taking the feedback from tonight and things we receive in emails and voicemails and in other conversations, any revisions to the proposals, then we would share with the board on the 10th. And then the final approval will be on the 24th.